back. Just giving this another go.
Technical difficulties sorted out.
Yep, hopefully everything works now. Um, yeah, my mic just was not being picked up for whatever reason by OBS or YouTube. I don't know where the issue was, but I think we got it figured out.
Excellent.
So let's take it from the top. Let's go back. Let's look back at the Bellator 221 card. Uh, we saw in controversial fashion, Jake Hager got a win over T.J. Jones, the mighty T.J. Jones. Um, he held on to the choke that he had, the arm triangle choke that he had, I believe it was, and he held on to it after after the tap, and Mike Beltran had to get in there and throw Jake Hager off, and the crowd was showering him with boos. It was a classic heel tactic. We see this in this finish in pro wrestling all the time. Obviously, this is not pro wrestling, but wow, yeah, it was crazy, man, to see Jake Hager getting booed. And it was pretty cool. I think he at least he did something, right?
Yeah.
It was a lot better than him just getting a win and being like, oh yeah, I won, thank you all, yeah, that's what I do. I choke people, so it was cool to see something, man. And do you know who Mauro Ranello is? The guy that does commentary for Bellator?
Yeah, he's done it for, I think he did it for wrestling for a while too, but he's been around. He's been in MMA for a long time, going back to Pride.
Yep, he currently works for WWE right now. So during this fight, it was like a heavy shilling for WWE, and him and Big John were getting, like, Big John was like, "Oh, stop talking about it. That stuff's fake," and I was like, "Oh God, what are we doing? Why are we talking about wrestling right now?" It was kind of silly. But what did you think about the little Jake Hager thing?
So yeah, that fight, even before it started, people were talking about it not because of Jake Hager, but because of his opponent. I mean, some people had interest, obviously, in Hager, and they will continue to, people who followed him from the WWE and stuff. But people, I think the big thing that really stirred in the MMA world was his opponent. I mean, the guy looked like he was just some bum off, not even a bum off the street. He was way too well fed to be a bum. You know what I mean? He was just some dude off his couch who'd been playing UFC 3 all day and eats way too much pizza, and he's like, all right, I'll fight. And then he's fighting, Jake Hager, who, I still don't really think Hager's much in the MMA world. I know he has an amateur wrestling background. He's a big guy, strong guy. But this fight was just a setup. It was Hager supposed to crush this can. That's why we call it can crushing. And the way he finished it, I kind of have two things pulling on either side of me with this. One, I'm kind of outraged because this isn't WWE. There are rules, and the rules are very, very important when it comes to fighter safety. When the fight is stopped, the fight's over. You stop. It's like the going to like a jiu-jitsu gym. If somebody's tapping and you don't let it go, you can get kicked out of there. You know what I mean? They're going to say never come back here if you're holding submissions after a tap. So it's a pretty big violation of like the kind of culture of the sport, the rules of the sport. In terms of penalty, I don't know what he'll get. I doubt anything, honestly, because he'll just say I didn't pay attention or whatever it is. But the truth is, the fix was in. He did this intentionally. He knew what he was doing. He was playing up the whole, like you said, it's a classic move in wrestling. So on that end, it's like, well, you're a horrible human being. Screw you, because you're just trying to get attention and popularity, and you're violating this rule of sport. But the thing that makes me not that upset is that it was an arm triangle choke. And chokes, yes, you could kill somebody if you held a choke too long, but you don't have any kind of threat of permanent damage from a choke. That's that like going to Huzamir Palhares in the UFC. He would hold knee bars and heel hooks that could tear your Achilles up or tear your ACL up, and he would hold those too long and crank them too hard. That's a lot worse in my book than holding an arm triangle choke. I think it was the nicest way Jake Hager could have been a heel, as he said, the bad guy. He did it in the safest way possible. So.
Yep, and then we had AJ McKee. I know somebody that you're high on, a big prospect in the 145 division in Bellator. Got a big win over Pat Coran, a veteran of the sport. AJ McKee won with a pretty unanimous fashion. Got a 10-8 round from one judge. Do you think that he maybe needed to get a finish here to maybe build his stardom, or he'll still be okay as a prospect?
It's a piece of concern for me, right? Because there are champions. John Jones had stretches where he just got decision wins. I mean, we saw in his last fight, it was kind of a boring decision win. George St. Pierre had some boring decision wins. Even Anderson Silva had some boring decision wins as champion. So with AJ McKee being this super talent, this guy who might be a champion for a long time, you don't want to see him settle in and coast to wins. But that said, he hasn't been doing that. Prior to this fight, 3 out of his 4 wins were by finish, submission or knockout, TKO. And I just don't see that in him. I mean, I think, if I'm not mistaken, his dad was a fighter, Antonio McKee. I might be wrong about that.
I'll see if I can find that out.
Yeah, so if he's the guy I was thinking of, he was somebody who actually got into a lot of spats with the UFC because he had a really good record and they wouldn't sign him. And then when they did sign him, he just had some boring decision wins and they released him. So I think that's something that's always going to be a piece of the puzzle with McKee's career, regardless of whether or not that's true about his dad. I might be getting confused, but
yeah, that's true. His dad was a former UFC fighter.
Okay, yeah. So the big criticism his father had is great record, but you're a very boring fighter. I think AJ McKee is a higher level talent. He started younger, and he has been getting the finishes. I just don't want to see him slide into it. But that said, Pat Curran is a hell of an opponent. Getting a decision win over him is no slight. I mean, and he had a 10-8 round in there, so he turned it up at some points. I didn't see the whole fight. I only saw some highlights, and he looked good. I'll be keeping an eye on it, though. I think it's an interesting aspect of his kind of career trajectory.
Yes, sir. Let's see. Let's keep it moving. So we saw, since we're talking about featherweight, might as well talk about Patricio Pitbull getting the big win over Michael Chandler. At first, I got to be honest, I thought it was a controversial stoppage because you couldn't really see Michael Chandler go out when it happened in real time. But then as you see the replay, you could clearly see Michael Chandler went out even though it was only for a few seconds, and he snapped right back into it after the fight was already off, and he was not happy with the finish. Of course, he was not happy with it, but he was like, "I'm fine. I have nothing on me. I have no marks, no bruises."
Yeah.
Did you see that when he was like showing the camera? He's like, look at me, I'm fine.
Yeah. Yeah, and he's kind of been outspoken before. I mean, the Brent Primus fights that he had before, when they stopped the fight because of his foot, he didn't like that. I mean, there's a lot with Michael Chandler's career that has gone on where he's kind of shown that he isn't the most gracious maybe in defeat. I mean, he's a great sport and all that stuff, and he shows respect to his opponents when it's due. But, I think the biggest thing with it is, like, it was very genuine, his protesting, right? He was like, I did not get knocked. This was not right. And I know he believes it, but we've seen this a lot recently where when people go out, they don't really remember that they went out. You're unconscious during that time period. So when they come back, they truly believe they were fine. They feel fine. They might even feel better than if they didn't, get momentarily put out. I mean, we go back to my theory on what happened with Robbie Lawler. That he did go out for a second. I mean, you could talk about TJ Dillashaw, who clearly had gone out a couple times, came back, and we see these protests a lot. So I don't blame Michael Chandler, but I do think from what I saw, it looked like he went out. I thought it was a good stoppage. I thought there was it's not just that he lost his balance and wasn't defending himself, in the most intelligent way possible. It was that he was clearly unconscious for a second. That's where refs really are pretty apt to go in there and stop a fight.
Yeah, and do you think that Patricio Pitbull is now he's a champ? He's lightweight champ. He's featherweight champ. He's on a pretty dominant run over there in Bellator. Do you think a guy like AJ McKee could be good competition for him, or do you think he would be able to steamroll McKee as well?
I would want to watch maybe some similar opponents between them or something, because these are fights that you watch their fights, but then you're only watching because you want to see what's happening, in the main event or something. But these guys have been fighting in the main cards of Bellator for a long time now. I mean, Patricio Freire is going back to Bellator, 15, it looks like, back when they were actually tournaments. Like, that's all they did was tournaments. And he was in every tournament, and he would do very well, either win it or take second place. And so this guy's been in there and had great brawls, but for the most part, he's just been steadily improving. Like, he never stopped improving. That's what you need to do to stay on the top of this sport. But it gives him this platform of skills and talent that he's reached over all these years, all this grinding where he's constantly improving, whereas McKee is a lot younger. And he started off with great athletic talent. and he had the pedigree with his dad and everything, and great coaching right away, but he doesn't have that experience, that stuff that you build up over years and years of the wars, the grinding. I mean, he's had like nothing but success. So it's an interesting matchup because you have the kind of the veteran who's at the top of his game against the young up and comer who's really never lost. So I mean, I almost, the way it's been going lately in MMA, it just seems like those fighters that have been through it but are still healthy, still able to take a punch, still fast, strong, and know everything about the sport. They've been doing very well lately. So I like Pitbull. Is he Pitbull? Is his brother? I always forget. But Patricio Freire. Yeah, I like him in that fight.
They're both Pitbull. They're the Pitbull brothers.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so. Yep.
But what everyone's really talking about from the Bellator fight card was the Douglas Lima Michael Venom Page fight. Douglas Lima had one of the highlight reel knockouts. It wasn't the best knockout that we've seen, or it wasn't even the best knockout in the last couple of weeks in MMA or in any kind of combat sport, but it was a highlight for sure. And 50 Cent definitely was not happy about it. But a lot of people were, though. A lot of people were very happy to see Michael Venom Page finally get what was coming to him. He was in there with some real competition after getting a lot of cans, if you will, as you like to call it. Were you surprised at all by this outcome? A lot of people seem to be doubting Douglas Lima going into this, and I think just because maybe they had heard of Michael Venom Page and they may not have heard of Douglas Lima. I'm not sure what it was, but I wasn't surprised by the outcome at all.
No, I wasn't surprised by the outcome. I don't. So here's how it played out for me. I was watching the UFC card and somebody said, "Hey, you got to check out the finish to MVP Lima," and I'm like, "That fight already happened? Dang it! I wanted to watch it." So as soon as there was a break, I went on and I found the highlight of the finish, and I see them circling each other, and I see MVP throw that straight punch, catches Lima. Lima looks like maybe he's rocked a little bit. I'm like, oh man, we're gonna get another crazy MVP finish. Like, this is gonna be a crazy highlight where MVP hits him with a flying knee or whatever it is, and then Lima does this thing where he catches MVP shuffling his trademark kind of karate blitz entrance, kicks the leg out, and then just destroys him with that bus driver uppercut. Yeah, man. You know what's a big knockout when they do the? I was telling you about this just a minute ago. The edit, the GIF that is a video edited, so it's him swinging Thor's hammer to get the knockout. Yeah, it was pretty brutal, and it's one that people will be watching for a long time to come. So yeah, it was very satisfying. From just, I mean, you just bleed. You want to see big knockouts and everything, but I think a lot of people were even happier that it was Michael Venom Page getting knocked out because he's talked a lot of smack. And really not backed it up. I mean, he's put on good performances, but they've been, like you said, against lesser competition. So that really grinds at people when someone's saying, I'm the best, I'm number one, but then not taking tough fights. But honestly, I thought MVP looked great from the highlights of the fight I saw. And I think he did prove that he belongs in there with the best. It's just that he didn't come out on top on this one. And he's like, I think you've been talking about it. He's been tweeting back at fans after the fight.
Yeah, he was saying things like, you got what you wanted to see, but I'm coming back and I'll be back on top. It's like he's acknowledging that a lot of people wanted him to get knocked out and he's unbothered. So I think that's a good way to keep people mad at you, right? Because he could come out and say, yeah, Douglas Lima was the better fighter and blah blah blah, and people would be like, okay, we respect this guy a little bit. But the fact that he's still talking shit is gonna get people even more mad.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, like when McGregor, another big talker, got knocked out or choked out against Nate Diaz, he handled it like a pro, like you said, like respectful and with pride. He's like, we're gonna come back better and all that. I do like MVP still. Like, I'm still gonna be cocky. I'm still gonna talk a little smack, and I don't care what you guys say about it. So yeah, no, he's a great character. I look forward to him fighting again. But at the end of the day, the story is Douglas Lima. If people don't know who Douglas Lima is, get informed, because this man's been in some crazy fights lately and he's getting better and better.
And he's poised for a finals matchup now in that welterweight Grand Prix. So it's going to be exciting. We could very well see him be the welterweight champion again. But speaking of champions, we had a championship fight also a few weeks back on May 11th. Feels like it was already 2 months gone by since we had this card, man. UFC 237 took place. We had 3 pretty big fights on there that we got to talk about. I think the first one that we should talk about is Jared Cannonier and Anderson Silva. Anderson Silva, a lot of people were saying, oh, why does he fight? You know, he's too old, blah, blah, blah. And then the salaries came out for this card. And the UFC, I think they gave him 600,000 reasons exact why he should consider fighting, you know, why he should keep fighting, rather. So it's tough to turn down that kind of money. I want to ask you one question about that before we talk about the fight. Do you think those kind of paydays are going to be a thing that's going to be moving forward with this UFC on ESPN Plus deal? Do you think it's still going to be a thing, or are those going to get phased out where they're like, oh, we don't need you, you know, we're getting ESPN money, we'll give you 100,000, you know, BJ Penn will give you 100,000, Anderson Silva will give you 150. You think what do you think?
I think there's still a market in MMA. So somebody like Brock Lesnar is only going to fight in the UFC. Somebody like Conor McGregor is only going to fight in the UFC, probably. But somebody like Anderson Silva,
I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, who knows? That situation's strange. But I guess what I mean is, like, the UFC is trying to control the market on the top paid fighters, and they are going to pay the most out of anybody when it comes to getting pay-per-view points. But those situations are severely affected by the new pay-per-view model, where ESPN is fronting the bill for a large portion of it. But for somebody like Anderson Silva could go to Bellator and be their biggest star. I mean, they're going to put their entire promotion behind him. The UFC's not dedicating their entire promotional machine to Anderson Silva, but there's still a market for what he brings. And I think their tradition in the past with fighters in this situation where they have a lot of value for other organizations is to pay them and keep them out of the hands. Like Overeem, for example, makes $400,000 minimum every single fight. Somebody like George St. Pierre, if he had continued fighting and was no longer champion, he would be taken care of in the UFC. They would keep his brand in-house, and I think that's what we see with Anderson Silva is we're going to give you a lot of money just to keep fighting here and not somewhere else. And there's a few guys like that. So, no, I think we'll continue to see big paychecks for the guys who have high name value and are associated with the legacy of the UFC.
You know, I mentioned BJ Penn, too. Do you think he's worth talking about for this?
We could quickly. He fought Clay Guida. I thought he looked pretty good for a guy that has nobody supporting him and hasn't won in 7 fights now or something like that.
Better part of 10 years, hasn't had a win. Yeah, he looked decent. He looked like BJ Penn for the first time in a while, or somewhat like BJ Penn.
He won a round. Not bad. 5 minutes.
Yeah, he won a round. That's better than nothing, I guess. Yeah, it's not really
good riddance. So I hope, exactly.
So Jared Cannonier got a win over Anderson Silva via injury stoppage. What do you think? What do you think this means for Anderson Silva? Do you think he's done? And what do you think for Jared Cannonier? Does this fight even matter for him going forward? Like, do you think the UFC would look at it and say, "Oh, you beat Anderson Silva, yeah, now we got to do what we did with Stylebender and give you a big spot"? Or do you think he's still going to be crawling and chomping at the bit trying to move up the middleweight division?
I think so. For Anderson Silva, I think the funniest thing I heard was somebody said he ran out of leg kick karma. Because for years and years, he had the most vicious leg kicks, in the UFC while Aldo was in the WEC. And he made a lot of guys suffer. And then, we had the incident with Chris Weidman turning around on him. I think he is just, he's always been a lanky guy. And he fought an absolute tank who just kicked very hard. And I guess his knee was already injured going into it. It's just a sign of old age. The guy's been around forever. Like you said, 600,000 reasons to keep doing it. But, man, what he's putting his body through. I guess I'm happier to see it go down like that than have him be, head kicked to the moon or something like that. But it's tough, man. It's tough to watch old man Anderson go out there and take a beating.
And what is Cannonier's nickname? The Killer Gorilla, right?
Is it? I didn't hear it.
Let me see.
Yeah.
Let me see if I can. Yeah, the Killer Gorilla. That's his nickname.
Yeah, he's a scary dude.
He showed it. Yeah, he got a pretty big win here. What do you think? You think he's gonna move up the middleweight division? Yeah.
So to address what you're talking about or asking me about, the other part of your question was, what does it mean for Cannonier and for the UFC? What do they think about? I think it's more about what does it mean. What does this win mean for Cannonier from the fans? What do fans think of him after this win? And it was a pay-per-view spot. A lot of eyes on him. A lot of Brazilian fans paying a lot of close attention. But even, the general MMA community being like, okay, this guy's just moved down to middleweight. He beat David Branch. We think he's really good. But is he gonna just fail the test against somebody who knows how to strike like Anderson? I don't think anybody really expected Anderson to put a beating on him. I think a lot of people expected this outcome, so it's not like super impressive in that sense, but at the same time, it made people think about him. It made people like process who he is as a fighter, and that's going to help him next time his name's on a fight card. So I think it does build his popularity. It does build his prestige, which in turn builds his value to the UFC, especially when you start talking about title fights. So I don't think he got as much out of this as Israel Adesanya, but Israel Adesanya fought Anderson Silva in a main event. And it was a lot more featured going into the fight, and Anderson wasn't coming off of that same loss. So it doesn't mean as much as it did for Izzy, but I think it was a really good win and a good time for that kind of win for Jared Cannonier. Now he needs to fight somebody that we think is a legitimate contender for the belt, not just a name, though.
And I have to mention his post-fight interview too, where he was getting showered with boos and he just kept egging it on. That Brazil crowd was not happy with him, but he just kept egging it on, and he stood there and just let him boo. I thought that was great. Instead of trying to talk over them, you know?
Yeah, with that look, he just had the look on his face like, you keep fucking going, I don't care. Yeah. Like, he just put their legend away, and yeah. No, I like that moment. There's something special about the Brazil crowds. That's really why when they have these pay-per-views, I'm not too upset that the quality's not that high, because I know they're pandering to this Brazil crowd who's going to in turn deliver some emotion, to say the least. But they almost had a terrible, terrible night. They just barely stopped this night from being a riot. But we'll talk about that fight in a second. I thought Cannonier handled it well, and I'm excited to see what he does on the mic going forward. He's an interesting dude in the division. I mean, he looked okay at light heavyweight, but since he moved down, he looks like a killer. So a killer gorilla, if you will.
Yeah, I felt a little bit of what the Brazilian crowd is like. You know, being in South Florida at that card in Fort Lauderdale with a heavy Brazilian population. With the John Lineker loss, so they were going nuts. I could only imagine being in Brazil after an Anderson Silva loss, what that would be like. And he didn't really do anything that disrespectful. I mean, he was hugging Anderson Silva. Anderson Silva put him over, said he was a nice guy and that he was honored to have the fight with him. And they were still booing him. I don't know what else he could do from like a respect standpoint.
I think he kind of challenged them instead of giving in to them, and that was the issue, right? Instead of being like, I'm sorry, I just want to put on a good show. No, he stood there and was like, yeah, you boo. And then they're like, yeah, we're gonna boo. He's like, yeah, you keep booing. Yeah, we're gonna keep booing. And there's just kind of a standoff for a while, and it was a fun moment, so I didn't mind it.
Oh yeah, it was good. But another fight that everybody's talking about, is seemingly a lot of people were not happy with the featherweight championship booking. We're going to talk about that in a minute, but Jose Aldo and Alexander Volkanovski squared off. The fight went all 15 minutes, went to decision. Volkanovski got a big win, man, over maybe the greatest featherweight of all time. You know, a very big name in Brazil. Another big legend in Brazil loses in Brazil. Crazy.
Yeah.
Volkanovski looked like an animal. This was the first time in a long time that Jose Aldo didn't really look great. I mean, he lost to Holloway twice, but he didn't look too terrible. He didn't get a whole lot of offense, if any, against Volkanovski in this fight. What did you think about it?
Yeah, I thought so. I think Anderson Aldo, going back to the Reebok shorts. Jose Aldo, he has a lot of film out on him, right? We've seen how he's fought over the years, and he's really, I think, kind of fallen into a trap in his fighting style that wasn't really obvious until this fight. That is, he waits for his opponent to fire at him, and then he tries to fire back with everything he's got. Against Max Holloway, Max was like, okay, I'm going to continuously press forward, and when he fires back, I'll eat it or I'll slip it, and he'll get tired eventually. What Volkanovski did is like, I don't do anything, he won't do anything, and so I just got to find the right moments to score some little points here and there and win rounds that way. So it caused a very slow-paced fight where not a lot of exchanging was happening. I think Aldo didn't want to engage. He didn't want to start the engagements. He wanted to counter, and he never really found good opportunities to counter. So it resulted in, I think justifiably so, a lot of people frustrated with the performance from Jose, but I think it just is a product of the game plan and fight styles. Styles make fights, matchups make fights, so it just wasn't a good fight. It happened, and I think Aldo's still a great fighter, but we did see more than anything, he's slowing down. His speed isn't where it used to be, and Volkanovski actually seemed like the quicker guy out there, which was pretty surprising. But the betting odds were very close in this fight, so we knew Volkanovski was going to give him trouble. He fought smart, got the win, but he didn't impress.
So, like I alluded to, the featherweight championship, we're gonna have a title fight booked. It's Max Holloway versus Frankie Edgar coming up here in a few months. Do you think that, before I ask that, let me say a lot of people were furious, right? A lot of people in the MMA community were furious, man, that Volkanovski did not get the title shot after beating Jose Aldo. Do you think that maybe if Volkanovski went in there and finished Jose Aldo or had more of an exciting fight, that he would have been given the title fight? Or do you think it was Frankie Edgar all the way?
No, I think absolutely. Why did they wait to book this fight until after the Volkanovski fight, right? What does Dana White say time and time again about wanting to be impressed, wanting to see people not leave it up to the judges, all that good stuff? He wants a fight that people are excited for. Why do you think Josh Emmett came in and knocked out Ricardo Lamas and was ranked number 4 in the UFC? Do you not think they want these kind of brawlers, these kind of people who are laying leather on people to be their champions? So,
1 second.
Yeah, no problem. I'll just kind of keep going on it. Yeah, I think absolutely. Oh wait, no, this is a chance. So betting, guys, my bets last time, pretty good. We won all of them. So I'm just saying, pay attention next time. No preview this time though.
Okay, sorry about that.
I was just bragging about my bets. But we don't have any fight cards this weekend, so I can't give any betting advice.
Yeah,
that's usually what I do when I get those little moments.
Can't give you patented betting advice.
Yeah.
Yeah, like you were saying, man, they want the biggest money fight possible, but now they could potentially wait for Volkanovski Holloway fight to take place at the Australia card that's rumored to take place with Israel Adesanya and Robert Whittaker. Man, that would be a big night. You see 2 Australian champions going in there, or two Australians going in for championship fights rather. That would be big.
Yeah, and you can almost have Volkanovski fight somebody else for a number 1 contender fight. Honestly, he has 2 big wins over Chad Mendes and Jose Aldo, but I had no problem with him not getting a title shot. I wasn't terrible. I mean, I think he's very good, but I just don't see why there's anything that makes him more interesting than Frankie Edgar. And Frankie Edgar has a bigger name, and he's put in his dues as well. So I was fine with the booking. Volkanovski can do more. He can do a little more to prove it.
Well, let's talk about the main event for that card. We have a new women's strawweight champion in Jessica Andrade in one of the most impressive body slam KOs you'll probably ever see, or at least in recent memory. It was very impressive. Jessica Andrade damn near slammed Rose on the top of her head. It was very close. Got the knockout that way, but Rose was looking really good up until that takedown, and she said post-fight that she had a huge pressure lifted off her shoulders, and she can go back to being like a normal person, I guess, again. She didn't like being champion. I don't know what it was, but man, what did you think?
Yeah, so first of all, yeah, Rose is a weird cat. Maybe she is happier. All that stuff aside, though, I really wanted her to win. I didn't know how bad I wanted her to win until I saw how good she was doing in that first round. It was an awesome moment. It's like, wow, this is a fighter that is putting everything together and is excelling at a level that no other fighter can touch right now. Like the way she ran through Joanna and obviously had some close moments in the fights, but was looking like she had figured out this sport and was going to be a dominant champion for as long as she wanted to be. I mean, the way she was piecing up Andrade was incredible, and I was just so happy for her. And then she got picked up and slammed on her head, and everything fell apart very quickly. It was scary too. It was definitely you could tell when she went down. Everyone was like, "Is she moving?" Right away. Andrade landed one punch. The fight got stopped real quick, and then everyone's waiting to see if Rose is going to get up because it was a scary slam. And even when they showed the replay, it got worse. It was like the back of the head, and you could see the kind of crunch as it happened. Yeah. It was bad, and the thing that made it happen, I think it's kind of interesting, was holding on to the Kimura. You heard the commentators, Dominic Cruz talking about it, how it was a counter to the slam. But going back to when Rory McDonald and Nate Diaz fought, Nate Diaz tried to hold on to that Kimura, and the bigger, stronger fighter was able to pick him up and slam him over and over again. And that's what Andrade does to her opponent. She likes that slam. So Rose really, I mean, I get what she was going for. We've seen her do flying arm bars and great jiu-jitsu kind of transition chain submissions and stuff like that. But in retrospect, it's very easy to say it was a huge mistake. But it's a shame she went out like that, and it almost makes you wonder, are they going to give her an immediate rematch? But with her attitude after the fight, I don't know if she might retire. So who knows what's next? But yeah,
did you see that Jessica Andrade said that she wants to travel to Denver and face Rose in an immediate rematch in Rose's hometown?
A lot of new champions like the immediate rematch because there's a lot of money in the immediate rematch. That's usually the most interest they're going to get on a fight. So yeah, I'm not surprised she said that. I'd be interested to see where Rose ends up in a few weeks when she makes her decision.
Yeah, so it's probably gonna be Michelle Waterson though. I think we talked about this. Michelle Waterson seemingly is next in line for that title shot. They love her over there, and she's very marketable to say the least.
Yeah. Yeah, I heard Dana White say he doesn't see her as a contender, but that's as far as the Dana White statement goes, even if he said, I think she's never going to fight for the belt, she's might be the next contender. So I don't put a lot of weight in that, but it was interesting to hear him say that.
Hey, well, let's move on. Let's talk a little boxing. I know we like boxing here. I don't know. Are you a boxing fan? I don't know if I ever asked you that.
I catch especially this heavyweight trio that's going on right now with Fury, Anthony Joshua, and Deontay Wilder. But also, yeah, some of the big fights. Yeah, there's some interesting stuff going on.
So Deontay Wilder made headlines for his incredible knockout over. I don't even remember what was the guy's name. Do you remember?
Brasilia or something like it. It was almost like Brazil because he was Brazilian. I remember Brazier or something like that.
Let me see if I can pull it up.
Bereza.
Yeah, so he had an incredible knockout, but what people are talking about mostly is Dominic Breazeale. I guess, yeah, Breazeale. What people are really talking about was his interview leading into the fight that he did, where he was like, "I'm gonna kill that guy," you know. And this is not uncommon talk. Like, we've seen people say, "Oh, I'm gonna eat this person's babies." Frank Mir, I believe, said that he was gonna bring us the first death in MMA when he killed Brock Lesnar. So we've seen this time and time again. But I was watching the show Ariel and the Bad Guy earlier today, and I saw them talk about it. They were debating it, and Mr. Chael pieced on it and said that Deontay Wilder's comments were too much for him. He said that was way past the line. You know, we're not here to kill people in combat sports. That's not what we do. But he said because boxing has had a lot of deaths. You know, there's been multiple deaths on record in ring for boxing, and do you agree with him? Do you think that maybe as a boxer he shouldn't be talking about killing somebody, especially when he's Deontay Wilder? I mean, he has I don't even know how to word it, but he's got a lot of power, to say the least.
Killing power in those hands. Yeah.
I didn't want to say it like that, but yeah, he's got killing power. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So Chael Sonnen said that. I feel like Chael Sonnen likes to be the guy that you sometimes want me to be, is the shitster, right? The guy who takes the controversial line because there needs to be two sides of a talking point. And it is interesting that you could say that he is stepping over a line because it does happen in boxing. It's a distinction that Chael is making there. Like, it doesn't necessarily happen in other sports, but it does happen in boxing. And so, okay, I get the point. But no, we've been talking about killing people in boxing forever. I mean, you've made a bunch of examples, but you go back to Mr. T in the Rocky 3 movie. Mm-hmm. I'm gonna kill him. Yeah. Like, I mean, Mike Tyson, Muhammad Ali, everyone. Yeah. It's one of the most generic shit talking, things to say. So no, I don't care. I think the story is the fact that it's a story. The fact that as a community, as a culture, we've changed to the point where saying something like that could become an issue. And what makes that really interesting is that there does seem to be this kind of line in shit talking that we just cross over and over that nowadays maybe won't fly anymore. I mean, what about when Conor called Khabib's wife a towel? Right? That's not really as acceptable today as it would have been 10 years ago, right? Mm-hmm. So it's something we're going to keep seeing coming up as social media becomes a bigger part of promotion, and social media is so driven by the kind of social justice movement, or whatever you want to call it, the trend towards not letting people cross these kind of controversial lines.
Yeah, I mean it's the PC culture, right? This is not the first time in the world that we've seen a fighter say, "I'm gonna kill somebody." Like, maybe I don't know if I should go this route, but I'm gonna say it. Maybe because of his background, he's from Brooklyn or the Bronx. He doesn't have, he sounds ghetto, if you will. Maybe people are like, "Oh, this guy is a gangbanger or whatever. He's gonna kill this guy. That's why we shouldn't give people like that money, blah blah blah, whatever." But he's just trying to sell the fight at the end of the day. That's all he's trying to do is sell his fight, and he definitely got people talking about it, right? I mean, people want to see him fight Tyson Fury again or Anthony Joshua again, even more now. So after this knockout and after that big interview, so I don't have a problem with it. It's promoting a fight.
Yeah, he did kill Tyson Fury for about 7 seconds. I'm pretty sure Fury was dead in the ring for about 7 seconds when he fought. So no, yeah, it's I like the angle you brought up with the kind of the classicist perspective of the rich white people not wanting to see the person from the rougher background talking about murder because he's a gangbanger and he's they kill each other and all this stuff. I think there's some of that definitely is a huge part of boxing in general. I mean, it's for a long time been most of the athletes have come from areas where they the incentive to becoming a professional boxer is way more appealing because you can actually make a living off it where you don't have a lot of other options. As far as where that continues to push forward in the trash talking, I think that it's just gonna, at the end of the day, a lot of it's gonna be about how hard can you hit, and Deontay Wilder can hit harder than anyone. So whatever he says, I think that there's a playbook in boxing, and he's playing by it, and that'll pretty much stay the same with some small adjustments as we become more politically correct. I think it'll still be you want to talk a lot of crap, and you'll get more attention by doing it.
Yeah, I mean. Yeah, we saw like a lot of controversial stuff, man. Just earlier this week, we saw the bare knuckle FC or whatever it's called, the BFC, had their press conference with Artem Lobov and Paulie Maganali. I don't even know how to say his name.
I can never do
it. Yeah, he's gonna be, or no, who was it? Was it Artem that spit on Paulie, or Paulie spit on Artem? I believe it was Paulie that spit on Artem.
It was. Yep.
Yeah, and a lot of people are like, "Oh, this is too much." Debating, "Oh, this is too much for me. There's got to be a line somewhere. Can't spit on someone." It's a common thing in pro wrestling. We see it all the time, and I don't know. Me being a fan of that world, I didn't see anything wrong with it.
Yeah.
What did you think?
Michael Bisping once spit at his opponent's corner mid-fight. I mean, we see stuff like this happen. I think it is. It's again wolf tickets. Deontay Wilder, Paulie, whoever. They're all just trying to sell fights.
Yeah.
But is there a line with spitting? It's something that's not physically harmful, right? You're not trying to break somebody's hand or give them a concussion right before a fight or anything like that. You're not fighting the person. You're not having people pull you off. It's just pure disrespect. It's biting your thumb at somebody. You know what I mean? It's just a symbolic thing. I think the controversial thing is that there's this kind of MMA versus boxing tone to this fight, right? It's kind of, they're trying to meet in the middle in terms of rule sets, and it's two well-known names. I mean, we're going back to McGregor and Mayweather, where there was the MMA versus boxing tone to that. We're almost maybe getting closer to, I mean, Paulie should win this pretty easily, but it is getting a little more interesting, and I just think that I don't even know if the guys really dislike each other, but I expect to see more. They're showmen. As boxing becomes more part of MMA, we're going to see a lot of these kinds of things come out, because as much as we talk about the talkers of MMA, the Chael Sonnens, the Bispings, everybody else, boxing's been doing this a lot longer, and they know what they're doing. So I expect more of it.
Yeah, but boxing seemingly wrote the rules. Muhammad Ali, Mike Tyson. You look back at a lot of some of the great guys they've had on the mic, and yeah, it's no surprise here to see some of this stuff starting to boil over. Maybe we may not see it in the UFC all that often, but it'll be out there in other smaller promotions, and that's bare knuckle fighting starting to make a resurgence, and as they're having some big events, we'll see it there, I'm sure. But yeah, man, let's see what we got. What else we got? Nate Diaz and Anthony Pettis has been booked. Wow, just wow. That's gonna be a barn burner. That's gonna be two guys that don't like each other, and they're gonna be slugging it out, throwing fists, throwing kicks. It's gonna be crazy, man. I can't wait. What about you?
Yeah. Yeah, no, I love this new resurgence Anthony Pettis has in his career. He's all about putting on fun fights. Going back to the Tony Ferguson fight where he's happy with how the fight went down, even though he lost. He got a fight on a McGregor-Khabib card. He put on a good show, got a moment in the fight where he had all the momentum. And I think he's like, you know what, this is just what I'm going to do. I'm going to have fun fights. I'm going to make a lot of money because people are going to want to watch me fight. It's kind of like a Justin Gaethje approach, right? Mm-hmm. And so this is one of those fun fights. It's one of the most fun fights possible with Nate Diaz. He's also like taking a grappling match against Masvidal. But yeah, the Diaz match it's exciting both because these guys are fighters. They're people who aren't afraid to get hit, and then they're gonna throw back and get mad about it. And there's gonna be an actual trade of damage. It's not just gonna be kind of like who can score more points. They're actually trying to hurt the other person, which creates exciting fights. It creates a lot of action. Forgetting the just bleed aspect of it. So I love it for that reason. But there's some bad blood too going back.
Yeah, there's tons of bad blood between these guys. Apparently, if you believe what Anthony Pettis has said on ESPN, if he was talking to Ariel Helwani, and he's like, I want to fight Nate Diaz so bad that I would turn down a Conor McGregor fight to fight Nate Diaz. And he's talked about how they always had drama, they've always hated each other. He always thought that they were gonna square up on each other if they saw each other in a hallway or something, but. That's a little bit out there to say that he'd rather fight Nate Diaz than Conor McGregor. I don't know. I don't know if I buy that one, but yeah, they certainly don't like each other for sure.
Yeah, I think when we were talking about it before, we were saying like it's once you have the fight booked, once you're committed to this one fight, of course it's the fight you always wanted. You're getting exactly what you wanted. It has nothing to do with what McGregor wanted. Who, by the way, he's in a cast apparently. Have you seen that?
Yeah,
Conor McGregor.
He broke his hand training.
Is that what is it official? That's what the injury is, broken hand?
Yeah, that's what it's believed to be.
Okay, that's interesting because there's rumors about him and Gaethje fighting. But anyway, I think anyone would rather fight Conor McGregor because of the money. But I do believe, and Nate Diaz is one of the best fights you can get financially speaking. I do believe that Pettis had a particular interest in this fight. I don't think those guys liked each other very much.
No, certainly not. And we talked about Pettis taking fun fights. I think Cowboy really has been the guy that kind of was one of the first guys in recent memory to start doing that, right? Just taking a lot of fun fights and just really doing whatever. He wants a Conor fight, but he'll fight anybody they put in front of him.
Yeah, I would say for him, it's almost more about taking as many fights as possible. And a lot of them were fun fights because he's a fun fighter and he makes them that way. They're action-packed and all that good stuff. And I guess that's with Gaethje too. Gaethje, every fight he takes, he's not taking fights to have fun, but he makes them fun because of his style. Whereas Anthony Pettis has shown kind of like an open desire, and you see it with the Wonder Boy fight, getting that book, to take fights that he knows is going to be fun. I think that's a product of going against a lot of tough wrestlers who just grind on them. You know what I mean? Being in a lot of fights that were just like not successful for him, but also not fun and didn't do a lot for his career because they were boring. And then people start to think of him as a fighter who's in boring fights. So by taking fights against people that he knows are going to strike with him, he's guaranteeing that the fans are going to continue to be interested in what he's doing. So it's smart. It's a smart move, especially at this stage of his career.
Oh yeah, can't wait for him and Ferguson either. Ooh, man.
Cowboy, yeah.
Oh yeah. So did you see Sage Northcutt's debut and one championship?
Oh, man. Talk about vicious knockouts. We were talking about the Wilder one just a minute ago. This one, it literally broke his face. Yeah. Did you see yeah, jeez.
8 facial fractures. He had to have a 9-hour surgery. And, wow, that's all I can say. He was in there with a killer. I don't remember who it was that he fought.
Cosmo Alexander was the guy's name. Yeah. So it's kind of interesting. I was following some of the talking points after this because a lot of people are looking at ONE FC and saying, this is a shady thing they're doing where they had Eddie Alvarez fight a really tough guy who knocked him out, finished him by TKO. Mighty Mouse had a huge challenge, and one thing people are saying is these opponents, these guys who are already on the ONE FC roster, look a lot bigger than the guys that are coming over from the UFC. And ONE FC has this kind of special weight cutting system that they installed because they had somebody die from weight cutting, which is horrific. But it's just very shady. There's a lot of like protocols and steps to it that seem to ensure fighters can't cut a lot of weight, but it seems like they are cutting a lot of weight. That's why having Sage Northcutt get knocked out by a guy who seemed a lot bigger than him, and have it being so devastating is pretty controversial. And you almost wonder, are they setting up these UFC stars to lose? And if they're doing that, what about the safety of the fighter? Because Brendan Schaub went on his podcast after and talked about how he was very upset about what they did to Sage Northcutt, setting him up to lose. But the counter was Cosmo Alexander, this guy, you hadn't heard of him. I hadn't heard of him. Very few people had. He was a kickboxer, but he hadn't won an MMA fight in like 3 years. He didn't have an amazing record. Clearly, he had the striking prowess, the power to do some very serious damage to a young fighter in Sage Northcutt, but I don't know if the ONE FC was really setting it up or not. I guess it's something we'll have to watch going forward.
And what do you think about Sage Northcutt? I mean, I don't know. I'm not too familiar with him. I was not really following MMA when he first burst onto the scene. I know, from what I understand, he was heavily hyped, and he was a big-time prospect. He came from the Dana White Looking for a Fight series on YouTube. Do you think this is it for him after this big loss? Like, do you think that he could put a run on in the future, or he'll just be kind of a guy that's just there? He'll just be another MMA fighter.
He has a lot of popularity. He has a pretty big social media following, and he actually has that kind of interesting, like, younger, like, what are the oh, man, I wish I could think of them. The YouTube stars that are young kids, like, one of them went to a Japanese forest and saw a dead person. It was
Jake Paul.
Yeah, he's like tied in with the Jake Paul and the
Logan Paul.
Yeah, Logan Paul. Yeah, he's like tied in with those guys and stuff in terms of the fanfare he has, like a lot of younger people and stuff like that. So he actually challenged, I think, one of them to a fight, and so I think he could have some kind of success continuing in pretty much any MMA promotion he goes to. He picked up a lot of fans in the UFC. He's super, muscular, and he looks the part of a fighter. He can do flips and stuff. He can do all sorts of cool stuff. So, no, I don't think he's done. I don't think he's ever going to become competitively relevant, though. I just don't think he has the stuff. And his story is he has a very over brother, and some people are critical of him. He went to TriStar in Canada to train with Rory McDonald and Faraz Sahabi. And he went to Team Alpha Male to train there. And apparently his dad has been kind of overbearing and coaching over the coaches this entire time. And so I think it's tough for gyms to get behind him. And I don't think he necessarily has the correct skill set or mindset to be a star and a champion in the sport. I think he's always going to be kind of a sideshow thing.
Yeah, I'm trying to find his... I was looking at his social media following. He's got almost 1 million followers on Instagram. That's crazy. Wow, for somebody who was not really a big deal in the UFC even. He really made a wave, though, for himself.
Yeah, and I could see something like an action movie role for him, you know what I mean? Like the Hollywood thing. Maybe not a star. I don't think he's maybe smart enough to I think he'd kind of look like Ronda Rousey if they tried to do the movie thing with him where he just can't act a lick. But he has the look and he could do the stunts. So maybe there's some earning potential for him elsewhere, and then he can continue to build his following and all that good stuff.
All right. You don't think UFC, though, is the place for him right now? Or not UFC,
I just don't think...
I'm sorry, not the UFC, but MMA in general is the place for him.
I think that there's a lot of fights he can win, and he can beat some very good fighters. Like, he has beaten some pretty good fighters. But I just don't think long-term he's going to be a champion. So if he's getting knocked out like this, where his face is getting bashed in, I mean, fight Logan Paul. You know what I mean? Do some stuff like that, make some money, and he has more value with his name than his fighting ability. And he's not a bad fighter, but I just think that there's other things he can parlay that into.
All right, let's look at the UFC Rochester card that just went down last Saturday. The main event, Rafael dos Anjos got the submission win over Kevin Lee in the 4th round. Kevin Lee looked pretty good. You know, we've said this before against, like, when he fought Ally Quinta and Tony Ferguson. He looked pretty good starting out the first, second round. Has a heavy output, but maybe just fights it too fast for his own good. He tries to do too much. He seemingly doesn't ever break. Like we see Yoel Romero where he turns it on one round, then he'll take a round off and just kind of do enough to stay in the fight, and then come back and just start wailing on you in the next round. Um, what do you think it is? What do you think it is with Kevin Lee? Before we talk about Rafael dos Anjos, what do you think it is with Kevin Lee?
Yeah, I read a lot of different opinions on it, and I think it was Josh Thompson was the most recent thing that he was saying. Josh Thompson, former UFC fighter, Bellator commentator, coach. He was saying that he thinks there is some issue with his coaching, in that he always seems to be way more tired after one round than he should be. And the issue I don't think is so much that he wants to pressure people; it's the way he pressures people. Kevin Lee is trying to chain these wrestling takedowns together and getting people to the ground, and he's not doing it efficiently. He's doing it effectively in that he is pressuring people and winning the fight and getting these advantages, but he's exerting way too much energy in doing it. Somebody like Kamaru Usman is constantly pressuring. There is no off button in Kamaru, but a lot of the times all he's doing is leaning on a guy. You know what I mean? Throwing uppercuts that, yes, have some mustard on them, but they're not 100%. And he's not doing everything he can, mostly in the wrestling game, trying to get it to the ground, because that's where you're using kind of a lot of muscle groups at once. And I think that's what wears down Kevin Lee more than anything. Now, there are things he could do different. He could carry less muscle, maybe do more cardio workouts, focus different ways, do the TJ Dillashaw, maybe pharmaceutical method. There are things fighters do to make that energy last throughout a 5-round fight, but he can't keep doing what he's doing, and he's doing it in 5-round. If this was a 3-round fight, because he got submitted in the 4th round near the end of the round, if this is a 3-round fight, he's fine. But it wasn't. It was a 5-rounder, so he's got to change something. Far be it from me saying exactly what it is, but I do think his approach in general just takes too much energy.
And for Rafael dos Anjos, he was kind of being used here as the guy to seemingly help the younger talent get over. Maybe Kevin Lee gets a big win over Rafael dos Anjos, and everyone's like, oh, he's here to stay at the welterweight division. Of course, Rafael dos Anjos stays his ground. But what do you think is next for him? Do you think he's going to find his way back into the title picture? I mean, he has 2 big losses over Colby Covington and Kamaru Usman. I don't know. It's not a good look for him right now with Usman as champ. He seemingly is not going to be there in the title picture. But what do you think? Where do you think he goes from here?
Well, if you look, so his last 5 losses, which are his only 5 losses since 2012, Khabib, Eddie Alvarez, Tony Ferguson, Kobe, Usman, all champions, right? So, and then he won every other fight. So it's almost at that point where you're like, okay, this guy's actually a gatekeeper. Gatekeeper in the sense that if you beat him, that means you are championship quality. If you lose him, you're not. And that is an interesting role. I don't know if that's exactly what this fight with Kevin Lee was. I think at a certain point, whether people are veterans or prospects, sometimes fights are just good fights. And they just kind of put them on, and whatever you get out of it, you get out of it. But it's not entirely about putting somebody over or putting somebody down, because I think that people still know RDA is a motherfucker. Like, there's nobody who's like, oh, RDA, that's going to be an easy win over an old, there's never been a fight where RDA looked spent or finished. He's always game. So I think he's going to get just good fights going forward. And if he can string together some wins, he could contend for a belt. I think it's one of those things where sometimes you can kind of just slide into that title contender spot where there's nobody else available. And he could be one of those guys to do that with a few quality wins in a row.
I say it seemed like they were giving Kevin Lee not an easier fight, but a fight for him that he could potentially win, because his style is very similar to Usman and Colby Covington. They're all 3 of them are heavy wrestling, and dos Anjos struggled heavily. So I think that was the reasoning there. But either way, though, dos Anjos got the win. Kevin Lee was very. He was very sad, and he seemed like he had nothing left on Instagram, and he talked about this fight, and he was very open. What's next for Kevin Lee? You think he's gonna stay at welterweight, or do you think he's gonna try to go back and play his cards again at lightweight?
Yeah, he was pretty distraught. He was like that after the last loss too against Eli Quinta. I think he's an emotional guy. And with that read, I'm guessing that once he settles down a little bit, he'll get back on track and just continue his career, because he is still very young, but also very talented. And I don't think there's any doubt that he's a fixture on the UFC roster at lightweight or even at welterweight. So what's next for him? I think maybe just somebody he can beat, somebody that they know he can beat. This was, I think, a more of a challenge. Like, can you beat him? The next one, I think, is like, you should beat him, and if you can't, then we got issues. There's a handful of guys. The problem is there's a lot of killers right now that could, without a lot of name value, that I think could challenge him. Like somebody like Vicente Luque, who we saw fight on the same card, a welterweight. If he's fighting a bigger welterweight who doesn't have much of a name but has good striking, he might be in a lot of trouble. So hopefully they give him somebody pretty manageable, because I think a win for somebody like him who's had 2 tough losses and takes the losses very personally, a win would be very good for his career going forward. So hopefully he gets kind of a squash match. Honestly, I'm sick of seeing him sad. I want to see happy Kevin Lee,
All right. Maybe put him in there with your boy Mike Perry. That'd be a good fight.
It'd be a very good fight. Yeah, I wouldn't want to see it on a personal level, but that's an interesting matchup. I like it. The talking beforehand would be great too. Both those guys like to give it. I think, isn't Mike Perry originally from Flint, Michigan? So I think they are both Michiganders. Michiganers?
Yeah, Michiganers. Yeah, sounds right. Yeah, they're both from Michigan, but I think Mike Perry is more aligned himself with Florida, I believe.
Yeah, he does. Yeah.
Yeah.
Michigonians? I think that might be it.
There you go, Michigonians. Well, so it's Memorial Day weekend's coming up, and Memorial Day weekend used to feature some big cards from the UFC over the years. Well, we've seen a lot of big moments, a lot of big things, man. I think the most recent moment was Daniel Cormier's first title win in the UFC over Rumble Johnson. Of course, he got that spot because John Jones had the whole hit and run incident, and he was removed from the card, and they vacated the belt and all that good stuff. What are some of your favorite moments from Memorial Day?
I wouldn't be able to tell you what happened on Memorial Day offhand. So I was asking about this earlier. Is this a list that came out? Ariel Helwani was talking about Memorial Day fights.
Yeah, he was talking about some Memorial Day fights, and it got me excited to talk about some of these.
So that was an awesome.
Run through the list. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I'd be excited to hear what's on that.
Yeah, so he had DC versus Rumble Johnson. DC got the title, and then we saw TJ Dillashaw capture the bantamweight title from Renan Barão back in 2014.
That was his original win over Barão. That is a shame that now whenever we think of those fights, we're going to look at TJ Dillashaw as a cheater, which, yes, that's legitimate. He did get busted, but Renan Barão was probably on something too when those fights were going on. I think that USADA has definitely done a number to Renan Barão, and that was one of the first fights where we saw that happen. But yeah, that was one of my favorite moments in MMA ever, man. That TJ Dillashaw Renan Barão fight. I believed in TJ Dillashaw going into it, gigantic underdog, but I was like, this young kid who's hungry. We see people when they're all of a sudden thrown into a title picture, they train harder than ever, and then they show up in better shape than ever. And I didn't expect him to win the way he won, but that was one of the craziest things we've ever seen. I mean, that first right hand where Joe Rogan freaks out. Yeah, we'll hear the rest of the list, but that's probably my number one.
We'll see. Then we had Cain Velasquez versus Bigfoot 2.
Just a mauling. That was in case we needed some red, white, and blue. Cain Velasquez decided to provide plenty of red ink. Just split Bigfoot open. One of the most brutal, bloody finishes. Just ground and pound, relentless too. Yeah, that was a good one.
Oh yeah. Yeah, that we saw. That also had. Let me see. What's that? Oh yeah, they also had Dos Santos and Mark Hunt on the undercard as well.
With the spinning wheel kick knockout in the third round for Junior Dos Santos.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that it was a weird one because it was such a great back and forth war. I think JDS was probably going to win the decision, but it was during the rise of Mark Hunt, where everyone thought Mark Hunt was a joke. Then he got a few wins, and everyone kind of mockingly supported him. And then all of a sudden, everyone's like, "Oh, this guy's actually really, really good." And then that fight right there was a good fight for Mark Hunt because he was still on the rise. People didn't know how good he was yet, but a better fight for JDS, obviously. That knockout was impressive.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Then we had, some not so memorable. We had Rampage versus Matt Hamill, Junior Dos Santos versus Frank Mir. But then we saw 2010, the grudge match, Rampage Jackson versus Rashad Evans.
Some black on black crime, as Rampage called for. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Well, why doesn't Rampage get his due when we talk about some of the guys on the microphone that really revolutionized the sport, man? Rampage was one of the first, if not the first, to really have an entertaining post-fight interview.
Yeah, his style was always very much like like preconceived one-liners and stuff, howling, and he had a very specific image, right, with the chains and everything. I think you're right. He probably does deserve a little more credit, but I think why somebody like Chael Sonnen gets more credit is because they did it a little more actively and more like there was more obvious intent. Like, I'm trying to trash talk my opponent right now, whereas Rampage was just kind of he did it a little, but he didn't do it with the same kind of obvious intent. He was just having fun out there.
Yeah. So talk to me a little bit about this grudge match with
they coached the Ultimate Fighter. They didn't like each other beforehand. That's where we saw Rampage kicking a door down during that season of Ultimate Fighter, an image that got shared everywhere. I don't know exactly what they didn't like about each other, but I know Rampage always hated people who would just take people down and lay on them. He wanted fights. He wanted fighters, and he wanted to, see people get hit, and that's just not how Rashad fought most of his fights, which is actually what made the fight itself so kind of unfortunate, but at the same time, appropriate. Is that Rashad caught Rampage with one big punch and then wrestled him for 3 rounds, basically. And Rampage had his moments, but Rashad, at the end of the day, made it a boring fight, and Rampage was not happy about it. So the trash talking continued going forward. But yeah, I think it's, at the end of the day, what it was is two guys who, when they did start talking smack, neither one of them backed down, and they knew they couldn't. So it was a lot of tense moments building that fight up.
Yeah, it's and the hits keep coming, Yeah, but first I guess we should segue. Rashad Evans was the latest announcement, the latest inductee into the UFC Hall of Fame. I believe it was announced at UFC 237. What do you think about that? Are you excited to see Rashad Evans go in? Do you think he's deserving, or what do you have to say? I'm curious.
Yeah, I like it. I've been critical of some of the other Hall of Fame entrances. I think Rashad Evans accomplished more in his career than Michael Bisping ever did. I think by a pretty wide margin.
I was waiting for that.
Yeah, it's people, because of recency bias, might not think of it that way, because Michael Bisping did finish pretty well, and they might say, well, Bisping had the longevity, his career lasted longer, but Bisping really didn't do anything until that Luke Rockhold knockout in terms of title contention. And then Rashad Evans was like a front runner at the premier division. When 205 was the UFC, when you're talking about Chuck Liddell, Tito Ortiz, Forrest Griffin, Rampage Jackson, Rashad Evans slid in there and he became a champion, and he dominated people, and he was undefeated. And so he was the star of the division at the time the division was the sport. And I think that really is something that Bisping never even came close to. So I think that is something that, like, a Hall of Fame credential, right? For the NFL, if you want them to go to the Hall of Fame, you want them to have a Super Bowl, title usually, if they're a quarterback or something like that. It's a big aspect. Not the end-all, be-all of it, but I think with Rashad, he was the guy for the sport for a little while. And if you're that guy, if you're a Conor McGregor for the sport for even just a few cards, even just 6 months, a year, that's a big deal. So 100%, yeah, he's deserved it, even if he did have a pretty rough ending to the end of his career.
I was super stoked, man. He was one of my favorite fighters whenever I was watching at that time for the golden era, the 205 division.
Yeah,
yeah, he was one of my favorite fighters, man, at that time. So then we also had in 2009 UFC 98, as Joe Rogan called it. The Machida era had begun when he knocked out Rashad Evans and got the big win. And it wasn't much of an era, huh?
No, it was a short-lived one. Yeah, Machida, so he was kind of the word enigma comes to mind. Like, he had those karate kind of hand movements. He kind of was rolling his shoulders around. People didn't know what to think of him. He was winning some fights by boring decision, though, where he was kind of using that karate sense of distance to land a couple punches and then stay safe the entire fight. So people didn't really know what to expect when he was fighting Rashad. I think people expected that kind of fighter. And he came out there and he blitzed Rashad Evans, and Rashad was talking crap, like, you don't hurt me, your punches are like pillows. Mid talking crap, gets knocked out. Joe Rogan's going nuts. I'm at a Buffalo Wild Wings going nuts. Everyone's going crazy. It was one of the craziest moments. It's definitely an iconic moment. So I think that's appropriate for this list.
Yeah, and also on this card, we saw Matt Hughes had a controversial decision win over Matt Serra. Let's see, your boy Chael P. Sonnen defeated Dan Miller, and Frankie Edgar defeated Sean Shirk. So this was one of the more loaded cards that I've saw here on this list. Let's see what else we've got. Then 2008 UFC 84, we had BJ Penn. Was it BJ Penn and Sean Shirk? Is that correct? Let me see.
That fight did happen at one point. I didn't know it was on Memorial Day, but yeah, that was where BJ Penn landed one of the most beautiful flying knees ever. Not because of how clean it was, but because of how obvious it was that he got a read on Sean Shirk. Sean Shirk was backed up against the cage, was coming forward, and BJ talks about it. He's like, I saw that he wanted that takedown, and so he threw the flying knee from like 6 feet away and just landed clean on Sean Shirk, and I think he finished him the next round or something like that. But yeah, or maybe it was at the end of the round they stopped it. But yeah, it was a great fight, and it was part of the legendary kind of rise of BJ Penn.
Yeah, it was Sean Shirk kind of just got tired of getting his face beaten and just called it off. Let me see what else we had. Wanderlei Silva faced Keith Jardine on that card. Lyoto Machida defeated Tito Ortiz. So yeah, there was some stuff.
Tito almost caught Machida in a triangle choke in that fight. That would have been one of the most bizarre events in MMA history if that had gone through. He had him locked in, the round ended, but it was a moment.
You know, I think this one might be the biggest moment of them all for Memorial Day in 2007, UFC 71. Chuck Liddell versus Rampage Jackson. Chuck Liddell was on the rise of all rises to be the face of the fight game. I believe he was just on the cover of Sports Illustrated.
Yeah,
they had him on Sports Center. He was doing tons of stuff, man, and then boom, Rampage Jackson.
I think it was a right hook that caught him. I mean, at this point, as big as Chuck was, he was slowing down a little bit. I think he's partying a lot. Everyone knew that. Everyone knew he liked his no sugar. But he was still knocking dudes out. But I think Rampage already had a win on him at this point in Pride. And a lot of people who knew Rampage thought that he had a good chance at winning this. I think the odds were pretty heavily in favor of Chuck Liddell. But the way it happened, the way it was just done. It was when the Pride guys were all coming over to the UFC. There was something very iconic about it. Like you said, like everyone was watching Chuck Liddell at this point. It was the 205 division that we're talking about at its height. And it was this guy with a mohawk as the front runner for a sport that's cage fighting. Like I don't know, it definitely turned a chapter, I think, in the sport because I think it brought in the legitimate competition to the UFC that at the time, like, yes, they had some of the best talent in the world, but they were still more of a WWE freak show. Tank Abbott, they had their characters that they had built, and then they became the premier in competition.
Yep, it was an era for sure. And it's crazy to think that. Like, you think Chuck Liddell never really hit the heights that he could have been? You think Rampage really put a damper on that? You think Chuck Liddell would have been a bigger star?
I think Chuck Liddell would have lost to a lot of guys that he never had to fight in his. I think he had a streak of 8 knockouts in a row or something like that, where he made his kind of rise to stardom. I think if he had been fighting, I mean, he fought Overeem and knocked him out. And, he fought some good guys, but I just don't think they were very good matchups against him. I think he was better strikers than all of them. Whereas there were some people like Shogun and Rampage. In Pride, who would have given him a lot of trouble if they were in the UFC at the time. So, no, I think it was more about just that as good as he wasn't exceptional.
Yes, sir. Let's see. The very first Memorial Day card was Matt Hughes. Let me see. Was it Matt Hughes versus Royce Gracie?
Sorry, 1 second.
Yep.
Matt Hughes versus Royce Gracie. Yeah, that was that was another example of like competition coming in and overtaking the old guard, because Hoist Gracie was the guy who he submitted everyone he touched, right? And he stepped away from the UFC for a little while. Matt Hughes became their star, and then Hoist Gracie came back to be like, see, I'm going to show you Gracie Jiu-Jitsu is still the best. And Matt Hughes wrestled him to the ground. Matt Hughes still to this day does not have a blue belt, a brown belt, a black belt in Jiu-Jitsu. He's just a guy who does the Jiu-Jitsu but never went through the whole, Gracie system or anything like that. And he dominated Hoist. He could have broken Hoist's arm, let it go so he didn't have to do that, and put him away with punches. Just a very one-sided fight.
Yeah, definitely tough. Definitely a tough one. Yeah, so that was it. That's all the Memorial Day moments said. So you said that that DC Rebel Johnson was your favorite?
Did I say that? No, I didn't really say much about that fight. It was a good fight. That was good for DC and everything. But I think the biggest one for me was probably the Machida era was up there. I forget, there was one early on the list that I really liked. But those are all good moments. I think they'd like to put on one of the heavyweight fights maybe.
Velasquez and Bigfoot.
That was brutal, man. Yeah, I don't know. It might have been the JDS Mark Hunt. There's all sorts of... They like to put on big shows for Memorial Day, so it's interesting we're not getting fights this weekend, but we've been pretty spoiled in the MMA world lately. We've had some great fights, so I'm not too worried about it.
Yeah, I can't complain too much, man. Is there anything else you want to throw out there before we get out of here?
No, not too much. Same old, man. Hopefully I'll be around the Twitch thing a little more. I just finished law school, so... Sorry about missing last week. Had family in town and all that. I'm excited to be back here. And then next week we got some preview for, is it a pay-per-view or something? We got fights coming up.
Yeah,
so
we got Gustafson versus Anthony Smith.
Yes, that's it. So that'll be fun.
Yes, sir. All right, well, plug your Twitch away.
Yeah, twitch.tv/LuberLibre, guys. Come check it out. Say hi. Talk MMA. I love it.
Yes, sir. Check them out. Check out the podcast, iTunes, Spotify, all those good places, wherever you get your podcasts, youtube.com/wrestlingwithheat, everything, man. Yeah, thank you again for doing this as always. You're always, you're always welcome here. It's your home. You're the co-host, man. We're happy to have you back. Do you think we'll do a 3-man show again, or?
Yeah, those are fun. I think we had some scheduling issues this time. I just last minute hit you up, so we'll figure it out. We'll plan ahead a little bit more, I think.
Yeah, we'll figure something out. All right, well, we're out of here. We'll see you guys next week.
See ya.